everyone, this is Ben. This is not Ben Burgess or Stefan Bertram. This is Philosophy of the People with Ben Burgess and Stefan Bertram. But Ben is late, and my nation just lost in the football. Ben is very impressive for managing to be late to every single show, including the including the one it's like today, which are an hour late. But yeah, we are going to be talking about eventually Venmo and the commercialization of everyday life, to which I will once again be blathering on about fan fiction, my favourite topic. No, we're not live on Twitter. Wonder if that's been removed by Jason. Yes, Ben will be here. He's not here yet. We're going to talk about his latest essay. Well, not his latest actually. His third latest essay. He just put one up today about steel manning, and then he actually put out a midweek bonus essay about that Civil War movie. And then 3 down is why G.A. Cohen would have hated Venmo. Ben is back in Mexico, and that's why he missed last week. But he didn't work out he was going to miss last week until the night before. So I didn't have anything prepared. And I heard that Donald Trump got an earful. Yeah, he did. It's really kind of incredible that Trump got shot, but in the most aesthetic way possible. People are saying, this is just some dumb kid who couldn't shoot straight. But what if he was actually, Trump's biggest fan and also the best shot in the world, and he just aimed so carefully just to nip Trump's ear and make him look so fucking cool. People are saying, Trump's going to win now, but I don't think that's particularly obvious. I guess the factor of how much of American elections are decided by how cool people think a candidate is. Because people will now think that Trump is cool, and they will think Biden is not cool. Biden's very uncool. Biden is cringe. Biden is old. But to what degree that actually matters in this day and age, I can't really say. One photo with a gun can change the world, says Sandwich. True. I guess that is the question. Will this actually change anything, really? It really does feel like, we're in a moment where, everything is coming up Trump. It's kind of especially funny that, oh, wow, this guy shot at Trump and, nothing happened. But he did, blow someone's head off and send 2 people to the ICU and also got his own head blown off. So quite a lot did happen, just not very much to Trump. But it does just feel like all the momentum is behind Trump right now, which is kind of crazy. Though it is also kind of crazy that people are like, what could a Trump presidency be like? What could happen if Trump became president? When, obviously he's been president. It's already happened. Trump has in fact become president of the United States for 4 years. And in those 4 years, not much happened very much, really. It did kind of suck. There was COVID, but I don't think that was really Trump's fault. He kind of just, acted out. I guess, the whole interesting question is, Donnie has main character interviews, I assume, very true. I guess the whole question is, which parts of the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, have their claws into Trump at the moment? Because I feel compared to 2016, in 2016, the deep state didn't really take the idea seriously that Trump was going to win. But now everyone's acting as if Trump is going to win. So all these kind of spooky entities are going to be trying to grasp hold of Trump. But it's not exactly the case that the US state and the deep state and the shallow state and the kind of NGO world and blah, 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 blah are at all united. In fact, kind of the United States is interesting in the fact of being this hegemonic imperial power, which does have these kind of genuine divisions among the ruling class about, um, like Ukraine or whatever. Though, of course, they're pretty minimal, but more than you'll ever get in like the UK or France, whatever. Yeah, he did nearly sort out North Korea, but then he just didn't. I mean, I think that would be a lot of what Trump 2024 will be like. Like, Trump met up with Kim Jong Un and fucking saluted that general, which pissed off libs. But then in the end, he just didn't make peace with North Korea. Nothing changed, and the sanction regime remained, and everything like that. So you can expect Trump to like go do like a big meeting with Putin, and they'll suck each other off, and they'll jerk each other off, and they'll fucking slap each other on the back, and they'll kiss. And then the US will still just keep prosecuting a war on Russia. That's what I expect to happen. I guess one of the bad things about Trump is he seems to have kind of like a level of like genuine animus against China. So maybe that's not true. It's hard to tell with Trump. Trump is really like a real solipsistic nihilist. And it's not clear what he actually cares about and what he actually just pretends to care about. But then I guess if you're kind of a solipsistic nihilist, what you pretend to care about and what you actually care about are probably not really substantively distinctive. Um, but yeah, in the case of Trump, he does seem to have this genuine animus towards China, which is bad because obviously that's kind of the way the US is trying to pivot now to war with China, which is kind of crazy, especially in the European context, where it's like, okay, like Putin invades Ukraine, let's, go to war or whatever. That's like on our doorstep, but Taiwan isn't on anyone's doorstep. It's not on the Europe's doorstep, and it's definitely not on the United States' doorstep. So, and then obviously compared to Russia, China is not just kind of, you know, 10 times more important to the global economy, but it's also, I bet.
Hey, uh, yeah. So, so I teach this capital class on Sunday afternoons, and yesterday my plan had been that I was going to start working on my lecture for that class. Since like I couldn't get it done earlier in the week, I was traveling, so I was going to start working on it like pretty much right after breakfast. And then I got up, I went outside. I think this is okay to say on air. I got and I went out to like walk my dog, and I saw there were a bunch of federales. Who were like dressed like they were like 100 of them were about to fight Jason Bourne, like ski masks, rifles, standing around the dirt road on which I live, so I think one of my neighbors must be in trouble, not Jason, and and in any case, so there was a certain amount of the morning that was spent trying in vain to figure out what was going on there. Uh, and, and then, by about the time, I was like, all right, I got to sit down to work. Somebody shot Trump. And then, I was sort of, I don't know what your, reaction to this was, but mine was, oh shit, this is going to be bad. And I spent a while in sort of fascinated horror scrolling. Everybody posting the image of Trump like pumping his fist with like blood running down his face.
He's a real showman.
He is an
He
amazing
looked
showman.
so cool in that video.
Most of us would not like look credit where credit's due. You know, the man was a reality TV host before he was president. He has killer showman instincts. Most of us would not have had the presence of mind to do that in that moment.
Which
And,
also now led to like loads of libs just believing it was staged in some way.
yeah, I mean, you know, it's the internet in 2024. Basically, nothing high profile and sort of politically salient and shocking could happen without uh, like a certain chunk, different chunk, depending on what the story is, of the population convincing themselves that it was staged or it was space lizards or holograms or what
Right,
have you.
consensus reality is breaking down, and we'll be reminded if Trump does win a second term that it's not just conservatives who believe in conspiracy theories anymore.
Oh my god! I mean, look, I'm also old enough to remember RussiaGate,
Yeah,
but like, but yeah. So then it's like eventually I finally forced myself to stop doom scrolling about that and to start. I'd already reread the chapters, but to start writing this capital lecture, which I was doing until about 2 in the morning.
haven't you
And
already done this class before? Why didn't you just use your older one?
I did a version of it before. I'm doing it a little bit differently this time.
Okay.
So I get up and I was like, all right, starting to crash, go to bed, wake up with the intention of finishing the lecture, which I did before class. And as I wake up, I have a text message from Bhaskar asking if I wanted to write a rapid response article about the Trump shooting for
Right.
Jacobin. And so I try to start in between finishing the lecture and during class, but then it's like, well, crap. It's like, all right, well, maybe I can squeeze this in between class and the stream with Stefan.
And,
And
and luckily, England were preparing to lose a football final just in time for you.
yeah, I was very confused when you keep talking about football. The NFL preseason doesn't even start till next month, so I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, so I did just about squeeze it in, but that meant that when you sent your "Where you at, bro?" message a few minutes after we were going to start, I was like heading into the final paragraphs of the article. So it's like, can you start the stream and I can join you?
You didn't want to take the time off to actually type that. No, I was like, why the fuck is he talking about stuff from last night? Because like, however long it took you to do the lecture, the class is still before this. So I was like, is he
Yeah,
doing some stuff of like a Harry Potter time turner? Like, what's going on?
that's right. That's right. Nice ref. By the way, gotta say, since we're on the philosophy stream, credit where credit's due. Prisoner of Azkaban. It's on the very short list of time travel movies with internally consistent rules.
Yeah, no, it worked. Yeah, it worked perfectly fine in there and in the book. I was just reminded recently that in the books, uh,
The
J.K.
Gooks.
Rowling portrays like a mixed gender, full contact sport.
That's true.
And
That
like
is
more
a
than full
very good
contact, like
point.
a sport where men launch iron balls at women.
It's a fair point. No,
Yeah.
yeah, no hint that she finds that trouble in this aspect of Hogwarts.
I didn't really talk about anything to do with the alleged topic of the day, but I did warn
Oh,
chat. I'm probably going to talk about fan fiction again.
oh yeah. Uh, is that did you actually talk about fan fiction at all? Or
No, I just talked about Trump.
okay, fair enough. Yeah, uh, yeah. I think I you know I'm not gonna give you the article I just wrote, but I will say maybe around the edges of what I say there that it's kind of amazing that things like this don't happen more often because we live, I mean, not me at this moment, I'm in Mexico, but like, in general, right? And not you because, you're not American, but, you know, we uh, live in a country that has 341 million and change people and 393 million and change civilian owned firearms. And also a very stressed out population with inadequate mental health care.
I mean, when I first heard the shots, I assumed it was like a spat in the crowd.
Like, it's kind of, again, it's kind of incredible that this doesn't happen more often.
Yeah, and
But
like also like if you're gonna do a murder suicide, then you might as well shoot the president.
right. If you're gonna do suicide by cop, you might as well, get. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very
I mean, maybe
yeah,
up until now, people assumed it'd be really hard, but obviously it isn't.
yeah, which is also, of course, something there are conspiracy theories about now. Oh, the Secret Service must have intentionally let this happen. It's like, what basis do
Yeah,
you
from
have?
all of the evidence of U.S. police, it's not
Yes,
like it's not like they're special magic police. They're
yeah,
drawing from the same well.
yeah, exactly. Like what is it in the previous history of law enforcement security arrangements that makes you think that these people aren't incompetent?
Did you see that the UK Prime Minister's close protection team all got arrested?
No, what happened?
They put bets on for the general election day.
Oh, okay. Uh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I actually kind of like the results of the UK general election because, as much as like I'm initially inclined to be conflicted because, you know, nobody deserves to lose as badly as the Tories do, but it's a terrible shame what they have to lose to is like the most worthless version of the Labour Party on record.
Yeah.
But then, as it actually worked out, this was kind of the funniest possible way for it to happen, since they got like less absolute votes than Corbyn's Labour Party got during the election that was so disastrous that he had to step
Yeah. I
down.
mean, yeah, people were expecting that they would get less votes in 2017, but then they got less votes than the abject
2019.
disaster of 2019. Yeah.
So it's like,
Um,
yeah, no, it's like, no, I enjoyed this. It kind of feels like everybody was a little bit embarrassed.
yeah. I mean, Labour did lose 6 seats, and they were 500 votes away from streeting the health minister, not getting to be the health minister.
Yeah.
Go on, Ben. What's the topic of the day?
Yeah. Well, less exciting than political assassinations, and I keep thinking that it's funny. I actually had already written this and even revised it. That was another thing, was delaying the lecture. But I kept thinking yesterday. It's like, man, I'm really tempted. If I thought that Andy would have time to do the artwork, I would have been really tempted to just like write something quickly about the ethics of political violence because that seems so much more salient right now.
Well,
But
I'm sure it'll still be in the fucking news next week. So
yeah, that's also very true. But in any case, yeah. So this is about G.A. Cohen's, sort of famous normative argument for socialism and why it makes me think that this actually occurred to me a little while ago. That, man, this guy would have absolutely hated Venmo. Uh, so Cohen, Cohen argues, he makes the sort of like broad strokes of the argument he makes many places, but the sort of most widely read version of it is in this short little book called Why Not Socialism that was published the year he died. In fact, I think it was actually published like slightly posthumously, like it might have, it might have already, was probably already in some stage of preparation for publication when he died. And in not 100% on that, but in any case, in this book, he argues that the he argues that our political North Star should be socialism, and in fact, not just socialism in the sense of socializing the means of production, but some sort of fairly advanced state, totally marketless version of socialism, and that we should be, always trying to at least get as close as we possibly can to that. And so he starts off, the book with this intuition pump about a camping trip, and he said, he says, all right, think about a group of friends going on a camping trip together, and how that would work, typically. People, like might bring various things that are, in the rest of life, right? They're private property, but at least on the trip, perhaps apart from a few personal possessions, but even there, right? They have they're more or less treated as collective property. People, if you bring some fishing poles so people can go fishing, for example, on your trip, tents, etc. Right? It's sort of, look, how does a camping trip normally work? I mean, everybody kind of partakes equally. If some of the friends end up going fishing, they're going, like anybody who's in the trip who wants to can have some of the fish, when it's all fried up at the on the campfire at the end of
Each
the night.
according to their ability and each according to their need.
Exactly, very very much like that, right? Like, and then he invites you to consider a much less standard way that a camping trip could go. That imagine that some of the campers started, asserting property rights. Like one of them found an apple tree that's off near the area of unclaimed woods where they're camping, and the other campers got excited. I think Sylvia is the character, finds the apple tree, and the other characters get excited. They say, "Oh, wonderful! We can have apple pie and apple strudel." And Sylvia says, "Well, you can, but it's my apple tree since I discovered it. So you only can if you give certain special." Okay, well, look, if everybody's drunk and nobody's catching fish, presumably at least the booze bottles are being treated as collective property for the purpose of that, from each according to each according to their thirstiness. But says, yeah, okay, you guys can have the apples from my apple tree, but only if I get extra fish after the fishing trip, and you give me a bit of extra space in the tent, etc. Then we would find this behavior intolerable. Nobody would ever go on a camping trip with Sylvia again because she's a weirdo. And Cohen asked this question, right, about, well, hold up, if you agree with this, right, if you think that this would be totally intolerable behavior in an interpersonal context like a camping trip, then should you really be comfortable with having a society that's organized around the same kind of principles, right? Distribution according to property rights, and then kind of what you can get, given your property rights and kind of what that commands in market transactions. Should you?
And your labor power, which you can sell.
Yeah, totally. Right. So should you be comfortable with that? Should you think that this is a good way to organize a society, or in fact, would it be better, assuming we can figure out how to do so, to organize the society in ways that would make it more similar to the more the more standard camping trip? And of course, there are all sorts of things you could bring up here. You could say, well, look, what can work at a micro scale might not work at the level of a whole society.
Yeah, I
Uh,
normally do get triggered by things which are like, actually, socialism is when you hang out with your friends and it's cool. But I don't mind this one. I think as these sorts of examples go, this is quite a good one.
well, what makes it fun um, is that Cohen is precisely not sort of doing some kind of quick move from this would be more desirable, therefore be a socialist. Uh,
Yeah, it's
what?
more like what? Why wouldn't we like the capitalist camp? Why wouldn't we like the camping trip to be more like every other feature of daily life?
Yeah, exactly, right. So it's what he's saying is, look, this gives you some initial intuitive nudge towards thinking that there's something that's more desirable about having our lives work in this more communal way, and undesirable about that like all else being equal, you would in fact find it undesirable to have our lives governed by these sorts of market rules. And the vast majority of the book is spent considering challenges along the lines of, for example, what might work on a micro scale might not work on a scale of a whole society for X, Y, or Z reasons. He no, he was a Canadian who spent most of his life teaching in Britain, so I guess that would be X, Y, or Z reasons. And maybe there are reasons why it wouldn't even be desirable, on a mass scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like he's considering all these challenges, right? So the structure of the book is, you have this initial intuitive nudge in the opening very short chapter, and then the rest of it is sort of spent first drawing out, okay, what are the principles that we can draw from like what seems to make a normal camping trip better than a libertarian weirdo camping trip, and then, okay, what would it look like if we tried to apply the better principles to society as a whole? And then let's consider all these objections to whether it can be applied on that kind of mass scale, or should be, or whatever, right? Um, and basically, Cohen extracts two principles from the normal camping trip. And I should say here that so Jason Brennan is a libertarian philosopher who wrote a response, a sort of attempted parody of Why Not Socialism, called Why Not Capitalism. And in Brennan's response, he essentially accuses Cohen of not comparing like to like, right? Of saying, it's like, well, look, you're comparing idealized socialism to warts and all capitalism, and this is unfair, and look, why couldn't I construct some sort of ideal libertarian capitalist paradise? And then I could imagine, like, I could sort of import the worst things about actually existing socialist experiments and put them in the trip. So he does this thing where he talks about
Camping trips in socialism when Stalin shoots you in the head.
yeah, actually that would be slightly more clever, but yeah, he talks about this children's cartoon, the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, not to be confused with the variety show with a similar name.
Good
Uh,
start.
but but yeah, it's Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Village, right? I think is the might be the Don't quote me on that. But anyway, that might be the full name of it. I've never actually watched this show. I only know it from Brennan's description. And apparently, he points out that in the world of the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Village animation, there seems to be private property in the means of production. There are like shops that are owned by different characters, and everybody gets along well. And nobody uses any coercion. So why couldn't he equally well say, why shouldn't all else be equal? We prefer to live in Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Village rather than imagine some version of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Village where, like, I don't remember whether it's Mickey or Donald who he has as the Stalin figure, who's like rounding up dissidents and things like that. And
I have seen this cartoon as a child, but I didn't know any features of its political economy.
yeah. And I think that it's very likely that the political economy is not well thought out. That like if you were going to actually like sit down and ask where's the food come from and questions like that, there might not be great answers, which I think is forgivable in a children's cartoon. But in any case, he says, well, look, you might say this is silly, and it is silly, but isn't what Cohen is doing exactly this silly? And I'm not very compelled by that because, one, I don't think that Brennan's attempted parody is actually comparing like to like, because
I mean, does he think that like camping trips are like a mythical thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Right on one.
Yeah, presumably actual groups of friends go on camping trips that work exactly the way that Cohen describes 10,000 times a day, right? This is
well, Mickey Mouse isn't real.
Yes, exactly, right. Whereas a half imagined village of talking anthropomorphic animals is very unlike that. So that's the first thing, that this is like Cohen is appealing to something that like he actually presumes his readers to have experienced in their real lives, or certainly at least, even if they're, they hate camping and whatever, you've never gone as an adult, they certainly at least know people who do things like this in real life. There's actually kind of a funny moment where Cohen is like, yeah, I mean, not personally, I give you a good time. I prefer to, whatever he says, is the, sit port in the lounge at Oxford or whatever. But like, this is something that people do. This is something that, that like is an extremely normal experience of people's everyday life. And second, of course, Cohen isn't bringing in the worst features of actually existing capitalism. He isn't having, for example, one of the campers hire some of the other campers to stack firewood, and then when they go on strike, bringing in Pinkertons to shoot them. Or he isn't like, I don't know, trying to come up with some camping trip version of the British East India Company, or the
no one's paying rent.
Nobody's paying rent, right? Like this is like, the worst. Like, yeah, he isn't doing some sort of camping trip version of the enclosures, right? Like the worst things about the history of actually existing capitalism are really, really bad. Like Brennan might not be aware of how bad they are. Cohen's not doing any of that. In fact, he's just having characters in his thought experiment assert precisely the kind of property rights that, libertarian philosophers like Brennan are eager to defend, right? Like every single thing in his example is exactly the sort of instance of normal capitalist economic activity, not sort of especially nightmarish stuff like the enclosures, the British East India Company or the Pinkertons or whatever, but like just regular everyday capitalism of precisely the kind that's celebrated by people like Brennan, right? So I don't find that very compelling. But moving back to Cohen, yeah, look, what does he say are the principles you can extract from the normal camping trip? Again, not some strange hypothetical, but just as camping trips normally go. And he does acknowledge that there are sort of, it's a simple enough example that there are multiple sets of principles you could extract from it, right? But when he's thinking about what are the features of that make it, more pleasant than the weirdo capitalist version, right? He basically says that, well, there's a principle of equality, and there's a principle sort of communality. So the principle of equality is everybody's being treated the same, and there are various ways that you could cash that out, right? Because equality is vague, and if you start from the premise that equality is normatively important, and you're the kind of ridiculous nerd who enjoys, analytical philosophy, then then you have to start considering all sorts of things like, well, okay, equality of what exactly? Do we mean equality of resources? Does that mean that if, like, somebody who needs kidney dialysis to stay alive has more resources devoted to them than there are to me, that this is like a prima facie like unjust inequality? For example, or even that, I don't know, I have slightly more resources devoted to my vision, than people with than people with 20/20, even though these are not very expensive glasses. Like, surely not, right? So maybe it's about, well, not equality of resources exactly, but equality of outcome, like sort of what that resources get you up to, a certain kind of advantage, but then you could raise questions about that. And is it really sort of objectionably unequal if, like, assuming that we've all met like a sort of reasonable baseline, that there's is it sort of objectionably unequal if, like, I don't know, I didn't get an extra serving of fish because, like, I was literally too lazy to like walk up and, like, get out of my chair again to get it, right? Whereas, you decided to walk out of your chair and get it, so you got the extra serving. So where Cohen comes down on all this, and there are other more sort of academic papers where he argues for this, is that the kind of equality that seems to be normatively important is equality of access to advantage. In other words, that nobody is getting less advantage than anybody else because of factors that are outside of their control, which crucially is not Cohen saying that, like, a gravely objectionable injustice has been done every time somebody has less access to advantage because of factors outside of their control, because shit is complicated and different values have to be traded off against each other. I give the example of, like, in a socialist future, so we've socialized the means of production, but of course that doesn't necessarily mean that we have 100% equal pay scales. Even worker cooperatives under capitalism might have some pay differentials to incentivize people to have certain jobs. The Soviet economy, for example, didn't have totally equal pay scales for all sorts of reasons, and and it's plausible that a democratic version of it wouldn't have either. One could easily imagine convincing people democratically to, for example, pay a little bit more to brain surgeons than podcasters, because well, hear me out. It's incentivizing people to go through all the years of education to become a brain surgeon and long hours
We've got to
internship.
get PhDs to do this, Ben. They wouldn't let us on otherwise.
Surely true. So it could be, for example, that there are, like, good. Oh no, are you there? Okay. Was that? Do you know what happened?
Yeah, something got disconnected.
Oh, okay, cool. Making sure that I'm not having internet issues again, but I don't think so. I think I'm all right. Yeah. So there might be good consequentialist reasons to, want there to be, to incentivize more brain surgeons and fewer podcasters than, might justify paying a bit more to brain surgeons than podcasters. And a good Cohenian socialist doesn't have to object to that, right? This is an all else being equal principle, not a not an absolute requirement. But yeah, so that's, but certainly, capitalist property relations can't be justified on the basis of an all else being equal version of principle of equality. Um, and so this gives you a good reason to want some sort of socialization. But even if we had perfectly achieved, we achieved not only socialism hard enough, right, but we had somehow perfectly achieved what Cohen calls socialist equality of opportunity. In other words, equal access to advantage, right? That in other words, nobody is being denied advantages because of factors outside of their control. Even if we utopianishly assume that we'd somehow achieved all that, that might still leave other troubling inequalities in place, because even if nobody had less because of factors outside of their control, we might still think that we might still be troubled by certain kinds of inequality. Like if, and this is where Cohen's community principle comes in, because it still seems like, look, if you've got, if you have, if you see people as roughly part of your, this is my language, not Cohen's, but I'm just kind of trying to make sense of what he's saying, right? If you see people as kind of within the circle of your, sphere of concern, guess that's redundant, but whatever, you see people as within the sphere of, who you're concerned about, right? That then there's a certain threshold of quality of life beyond which you won't let their life sink, even if it was their own damn fault because they made stupid choices, right? Like if a member of your family, if an old friend, if somebody like that was ended up sleeping in the streets, not really because of any structural thing about capitalism, but just because they made a series of spectacularly stupid, self-destructive decisions, you would nevertheless not be like, well, not my problem, right? Grandma can sleep in the streets until she makes better choices. And there's a certain threshold beyond which you wouldn't let them sink. There's probably a certain size beyond which you wouldn't even want the gap between your quality of life and theirs to, metastasize. And so roughly the community principle says, a good society is one where we would kind of treat everybody as if they were in our sphere of concern. And, there's a sort of certain degree of, inequality that, beyond which, we just wouldn't let distributive inequality grow. There's a certain threshold beyond which we wouldn't let them sink. And so Cohen calls this the socialist principle of community. And it's, and I think it's, in Why Not Socialism, it's far less well fleshed out than the equality principle, right? It seems like he spent much more time thinking about the equality principle. But there's this other article that he wrote for New Left Review. They finally got me. I finally got a subscription so I could, access this in the archives, because I'd seen this quoted and I really wanted to read the article. So there's this article that he wrote in the early 90s for New Left Review called Back to Socialist Basics. And in there, he talks about these same two principles about equality and community. But in that case, he uses a really interesting, he uses an example that caught my attention. Rather than a camping trip, but same idea. He's thinking about sort of interpersonal contexts where we have relationships with each other, such as friendship, that, are structured around different, more communal, non-market principles. And he says, okay, when we're thinking about community versus markets, markets are all about reciprocity. I'm doing for you in exchange for you doing for me. and says, look, if you think about communal relations, there's a certain kind of reciprocity there, but it's a different kind of reciprocity. It's, for one thing, it's not nearly as fine grained, right? It's not, because we're not just trying to seek advantage and thus reluctantly doing our part so we can reap the advantages. It's that
You'd hope
we,
not.
yeah, one hopes not, right? That one hopes that that's not how one approaches one's relationship with, loved ones, friends, relatives, significant others, etc. Right? That we're just trying to get the best possible deal for us, and that's all we care about. And if we didn't have to do anything for them, we wouldn't, because screw them. Rather, the hope is that what we want from those kinds of relationships is we want to do things for them because we care about them, and we want them to do stuff for us because we want them to care about us, right? And we would be upset about a breakdown in reciprocity because that would make us think that they didn't care. But that's a slightly different thing from, like, I'm not getting the maximal best deal for me, which is what I care about in this situation. So he gives this example of a group of friends drinking at a bar, and the difference between sort of casually keeping track of who covers different rounds of drinks. Oh, this is my round. Versus like somebody whipping out a napkin, bar napkin and a pen, and keeping track of exactly how much everybody owes him for the round that he covered down to the penny to make sure that he's not being cheated. And which is a funny example, and it's a fun example. It's certainly one that makes the point. But man, it made me think. Good Lord, Cohen would really hate the popularization of Venmo, because this app, certainly in my experience, incentivizes acting like the guy with the bar napkin and the pen. Because what does Venmo do, or whatever? I could have, I know there's also Zelle and PayPal or whatever, Venmo for whatever reason.
We don't really have to use any of these in the UK because our just normal bank apps does this thing.
Okay,
I
but
found this.
this. Oh, sorry, you're saying.
I found this out when Bashkar and Connor Kilpatrick were trying to send me uh, movie money stuff, and it was just like almost impossible for them to do it without having PayPal or whatever. They ended up having to do like a formal bank transfer or whatever. But in the UK, you can just use your bank app to do all the stuff that you would in Venmo.
Oh yeah, but you're doing like you're still like whipping out your phone and doing a quickie tiny bank transfer, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Like, but I think because it's not like a cultural thing. Like, it's not because there isn't people didn't get Venmo for the specific reason of sending money like that. I think it's less culturally widespread.
okay, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, so
Do
it's
you know the
become.
name of the Dutch equivalent?
Oh, I don't know.
Tike.
Tika.
Tike, yeah, and they're fucking obsessed with it.
Okay, that sounds right. Yeah, like, so in my experience, right, this has become. I'm sure, like many things, we're all in our own little bubbles, and it's probably, it's probably much more or less common, depending on your specific demographics and who you spend time with and whatever. But at least in sort of multiple overlapping bubbles that I'm part of, I feel like it's become quite culturally common. So, and it's also just kind of as a funny coincidence because I was threatening to write this for weeks, and I'd even thought about the idea long before I started bringing it up in a half joking way in the stream. That
You
so,
embarrassingly offered to embarrassed did it? Like you were slightly embarrassed to do so, offered to Venmo someone.
yeah. So yeah, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and Venmo is the example I was thinking about, and it was a little funny researching this. I realized that 2009 is the year Why Not Socialism came out. It's the year G.A. Cohen died. It's also the year Venmo started. And it's become much more popular since then. And, of course, because in many situations, I can think of probably about 10,000 times that I've either offered to Venmo somebody some money for something, or they've offered and I've eagerly accepted, because the whole appeal of the app and similar ones is that it avoids all sorts of instances of trivial social awkwardness about money,
Mm.
right? It's oh, one person, I don't know, you're at a cash only place and only one person has cash, or, you have, it seems like it's going to be a pain in the ass to ask them to split it up, to put different, parts of different cards. So, oh, no problem. I'll, why don't I just cover this and, and you can Venmo me, or, vice versa. And again, it's avoiding minor social awkwardness is very tempting. So it's very easy to get into the habit of
It
doing
only
that.
really works once it already becomes socially acceptable, right? Because
Totally.
when Venmo isn't socially acceptable, then offering to Venmo just causes social awkwardness.
Also true. Yeah, there's a collective action problem, but sadly they seem to have overcome it,
Yeah.
at least in certain cultural pockets.
Yeah, because
It's
you're giving the actual use cases of it there,
yeah,
and then that allows it to then slip into we sending you 352 for the beer.
totally right. And yeah, I feel like that's actually gotten very common. That at least again, certain circles or whatever, that that people, just because it's once it's normalized, however exactly that happened, then it just becomes this nice cheat code to avoid minor awkwardness. And so I'm sure I suppose the libertarians got the last laugh, because I'm sure even as we speak, someone somewhere is coming back from, it's Sunday, right? They're coming back from a weekend camping trip, coordinating over text, who owes who, how much over Venmo to,
Right. No, I think that's one of the fucked up things about Venmo compared to UK banking apps, because in Venmo you can send a request for money, right?
yes, you can.
Right, and that's
Yep.
not a thing on our banking apps normally.
Yeah. No, that's right. You can essentially invoice your friends, right?
And you can do it all through the app, right? You don't have to text them being it was $13 or whatever. You can
Yeah,
just send.
you could theoretically do it all through the app. I will say, in my experience, it seems to be vastly more common to do at least some of it over text. Be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna
It's
send
a
you a
bit too
Venmo
close to the
thing for the
metal to do it all through Venmo.
yeah. Be like, oh hey, okay, so it's cool. You did this. I'll send you a Venmo request, whatever. Yeah. And so it seems like there is something very depressing about this, that in a small way, but still a little depressing, that the kind of strategy that Cohen was using when he was talking about camping trips and Why Not Socialism, or when he was talking about buying rounds of drinks in in Back to Socialist Basics, is he's contrasted these interpersonal settings where we have these relationships that we value in part precisely because they're kind of an island of a better form of human connection that we get through markets. And he's saying, hey, you might not see, because we're so used to having markets rule everything around this, right? And by the way, I should say part of his point about with the principle of community and all that is, it's look, if we achieve some sort of market socialism, it would take us an awfully long way on the principle of equality, but it would, to the extent that markets were still playing a role in this form of socialism, it would still you're still going to get like these very non-community-ish forms of human interaction. Um, and
What I
so
think
he
is
has
really
this.
interesting in this context, and why I brought up fan fiction at the start, was, and maybe this doesn't go for other
Sure.
people because
Yeah.
they use the internet in quite intensely commercialized ways. But for me, my kind of digital life is much less commercialized than my everyday, like actual physical life, which seems really bad. Like when I'm on the internet, I don't spend money at all, basically. Like, obviously, I'm sure some people do just constantly spend money on the internet, but I don't. Like, I use Spotify and I use YouTube and I use all these things
Yeah.
without spending money, and I download PDFs for free and whatever. And I read fan fiction and these non-commercialized mediums, or mediums which are commercial, but not in the way that like you pay them money, which is how Spotify and YouTube work. But then I go out in
Yeah.
the world and you just constantly spend money on everything.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess I spend money on like online services that, um, streaming services and whatnot, that like, but it's not a daily experience of spending money, right?
Right?
Typically.
The subscription is more disconnected,
Yeah.
and it
Uh,
would like, and it is much nicer in everyday life, where instead of paying for the bus ticket every time, you have the bus pass, which you paid for, in the
mhm.
sense that we have online subscription services.
Yeah, yeah. It's not being rubbed in your nose every time you're interacting. You know, and I would also, by the way, note for people sort of inclined to sneer at the airy fairy utopianness of all this, that Karl Marx in the early chapters of Capital essentially, or actually, yeah, the end of the first chapter essentially uses the same strategy of for a slightly different purpose, but I mean, he's thinking about things other than production for commodities, and he brings up you know he brings up the example of a patriarchal family as like a as an example of something that might be non-ideal in other respects, right? But people are working sort of directly, for themselves and the family unit, and not and not for exchange. And certainly this is something I was thinking about a lot when the class we were going over the early chapters, because because Marx does have, he says very little about it, right? But he does have these sort of tantalizingly brief glimpses of a kind of long-term non-market ideal of socialism. Like he says, even when he was talking about the suggestion of like labor time vouchers in a footnote, I want to say in chapter 3, he has he he says this would like no more be money than the voucher when you check your code at the theater is something like
Mhm.
that. I might be getting the analogy slightly wrong, right? Um, but yeah, and Cohen says, what's desirable, like that. It's like, look, people. He says that there are obviously these logistical problems with about trying to figure out how to like plan an entire economy without any kind of market mechanisms at all, right? You know, very, you know, the whole socialist calculation debate. The Soviets weren't even doing like totally wall to wall planning. They still had money, but like but trying to do as much as they were, they ran into all kinds of problems, etc. So there's this sort of series of logistical headaches. Uh, and, Cohen sort of says, look, if at a certain stage of development, some kind of market socialism is the best you could achieve, then sure, by all means. But he says some overly eager market socialists, in their belated discovery, right, of what Adam Smith knew all along, that, when Adam Smith is talking about, private vices being turned into public virtue, right? Their belated discovery of the public virtue part, that there are these sort of efficiency advantages of markets. end up forgetting the thing that actually even Smith is recognizing, that there's something repugnant about having to use these mechanisms, right? That we should, that it is still better if we can figure out how to get past that entirely, right? So and so in Cohen's strategy of trying to motivate the
You
thought,
mentioned the example of the butcher, right?
yeah,
Who
yeah,
only, serves proper meat and not like fucked up shit he found in the street because of like
yeah.
the threat to his self interest. Be nice if he didn't, though.
Yeah. Be nice to have a society where you're being served meat, that wasn't fucked up because of actual concern for you. Totally, right? I think there's also, by the way, a I don't remember who I'm stealing this line from, but there's like a funny observation about Adam Smith having lived at home where his mother was in fact providing his food, not based on self interest, but
I mean, I remember reading that book, and a lot of it is just kind of complaining about bad workmanship.
yeah. Uh, but yeah, look, yes, it would be better if the butcher and the baker were actually motivated by networks of mutual concern. If we could figure out how to organize society that way, and to motivate that thought, Cohen has the strategy, whether with the camping trip or with the friends alternating rounds of drinks, where he basically asks us to notice that the human relationships that we value the most don't work according to market norms. They work according to very different norms. And there's a reason why we value that so much. And we're sort of used to markets dominating everything else. But when we imagine hypothetically markets intruding on these little islands, we're very upset by the thought. And what does that tell us, right? That's roughly his strategy. And, I actually think it's a decent argument, but there is something that's very depressing about the fact that actually existing capitalism is chipping away at those islands of non-market interaction all the time, and that actually market norms are becoming more common even in those contexts. Um,
And if you want to avoid them, you have to, join like a Tumblr fandom or something.
yeah, uh, yes, yeah, um, yeah. I
It
don't
is
read fan
interesting,
fiction.
like how violently kind of anti any kind of commercial money stuff a lot of these online communities are. But then I imagine these people also, they'd be Venmoing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, whatever. I mean, they might accept it in certain contexts, but yeah, whatever sphere they've carved aside. Um, I mean, I don't read fan fiction, so Kindle does get a certain amount of money from me, and then like
Yeah.
the only socialist thing I do to deliver reading material to me is that I have a library card. But
Nice.
the
People do say that thing of like, if they hadn't invented public libraries and they tried to invent them now, it would be
oh
like the
my
position
god,
of like the most insane hard left.
yeah,
They'd
yeah,
be
that
like,
would be.
common action problem, fucking everyone will just go in there and piss on all the books and fucking lick them and fucking steal them and then sell them on eBay.
Oh my god, can you imagine like how much people would make fun of it if like yeah, libraries didn't exist and people like us started to be like, okay, so here's the how we want the government to spend its money. The state should buy a bunch of books and then keep them in a building where anybody who wanted to could read them for free.
Yeah, they can literally pick them off the shelf and just walk out. And
Yeah,
that'll
yeah,
work out well.
yeah. It'll all work out. It'll be fine. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's I yeah, I mean, there is a reason why God, especially in cities that have like actually really good public library systems, like Los Angeles does, like the Central Library is like this. I don't know. It's like a cathedral of books. It's actually kind of amazing. It's like basically untouched since the 1930s.
I mean, people
Or
might object now because everyone's illiterate. So they'll be like, well, no one's going to go there.
Yeah, cue the old Family Guy gag where Brian is sitting at the bar and he's trying to hit on this girl who's like looking at her phone the whole time he's talking to her. He's like, I wrote a book. She's like, oh, what's a book? It's like it's like a long magazine. A long what? It's like if
No, no
the internet were made
pictures.
of a tree. But yeah, so the best thing about all this, so that, when I talk about, when I sort of make the connection at the end, that was, would have otherwise been the last line of the essay, markets conquer everything. But then there was this kind of funny personal coda that I had to add, which is that my neighbor Dave, who, if you follow Jason Miles's Instagram, there you might have seen a couple of times when he's done live streams. When me and Dave are over at his place for breakfast, we start talking about something. He's like, "Oh, this would be fun to put on Instagram," and he starts live streaming it. So Dave is the person who's not me and who's not Jason Miles in those live streams, and he was coming back from work. Like kind of goes back and forth from Rosarito to San Diego, and he drives an Uber in San Diego. And he was coming back from work, and we had plans to like meet up to get some pizza and drink some drinks. And he was going to pick all this on his way up from work, and he was originally planning to grab a bottle of bourbon, and then he texted me to say that I don't know, there wasn't any at the store he was at, or he wasn't sure where there was a liquor store around there or something, so he might just pick up some beer. And without thinking about it, I was actually in the middle of writing this essay. So the first thing I said is like, oh, there's actually a liquor store, blah, 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 right? Where are you going? Which direction you're going in? And then feeling bad about encouraging him to do the more expensive option, with immediately, unthinkingly, I was like, oh, if you want to pick up the bourbon, I can just Venmo you half of it.
And the libertarian bro was like, no.
Yeah. And then, yeah, man is not a socialist, he is the one guy in those live streams who's like not like a Marxist podcaster. In fact, very far from it, right? A man invests in crypto, but yeah, he's doing a better job of resisting the intrusion of market norms into friendship norms than I am, because he's like, what? No, I'll just, you just get it next time.
Did you see that the Trump shooter seemed to have been accidentally scammed into donating to the Democrats?
I did, yeah. This is actually
His donation was made the same day Joe Biden was sworn into office. According to Progressive Turnout Project, he made the donation in response to an email about tuning into the inauguration and was unsubscribed from the group's mailing list. So he like clicked on a link to try and watch the inauguration, and then accidentally gave the Democrats $15 and then unsubscribed.
Well, one of the points one of the points that I make. Sorry, I was just looking at the text with Bhaskar and Micah about the.
I was worried that you just disconnected there.
No.
You weren't moving your head.
I just got distracted, but yeah, one of the points I make in the article is, so yeah, I saw Ryan Grimm post about that earlier today, that this like Democrat PAC that he'd donated to is like this kind of borderline scam operation. But one of the points I made in the article is this, like, look, I mean, I don't, the fact that he was a registered, like, okay, well, if it was even him, I don't know if that's totally confirmed, right? Like, but somebody with the right name and zip code donated to this progressive PAC, and somebody with the right name and zip code is a registered Republican, and could be that one of the other of these guys is not the shooter. God knows, father and son, different guys with the same name. It could be that neither of these guys is the shooter. It could be that it's all the same person. And like, I don't know why it would surprise anybody if it was, because over the years, I've consistently seen that people who do acts of lone wolf political violence are generally not very ideologically coherent.
Especially ones who are 20 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
I also feel like doing
Like,
it sniper style is probably like the most deadly way to do it. So it was basically committing like very public suicide.
yeah, yeah,
What are
exactly.
you writing next week, Ben?
Yeah, well, I will say what I wrote for this week, if we want to stay a week behind next week, is a
It's about the
essay
Man of
called
Steel with Joe Stalin.
yes, against the expectation of steel manning. So it's basically a exploration of the way that we talk about steel manning arguments and um, whether it actually whether this is something that actually always makes sense, whether it's sort of good and healthy for the culture of how people argue about things online, for people to sort of treat this as a universal expectation
Yeah,
that
I
you
mean,
should always.
it seems weird when someone gives you an argument which is bad, that what you should do is reconstruct it into an argument which is good and then respond to that, as opposed to just responding to what they actually said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it seems to me that real manning is often the right thing to do. In fact, is
Right. I
pretty
mean,
much in.
steel manning makes sense in the context of like an academic debate where they probably know what they're talking about. But outside of those circumstances, well, I mean, you've wrote the essay. I don't need to give my commentary without reading it.
Well, I think that yeah, I mean, I think that charity, like interpretive charity, makes varying amounts of sense in varying contexts, right? But like we say, oh, this steel man argument that seems like it's going a bit beyond charity and being like, oh, I'm going to construct a
Yeah, it's like
new
reconstruction, which, to go back to the academic example, if you fail to respond to the person you're responding to because you've just written like a different thing, then that's a bad academic paper as a response.
yeah, you should always at least start by responding to the argument somebody actually made. Uh, if there's ambiguity about how to interpret it, sure, be charitable, but like, you should at least always respond by arguing. You respond into the argument somebody made, and then even beyond that, there's a question about like, you know, if sometimes it might be the case that once after you've responded to the argument that they've made, you can see, oh, here's a slightly better one they could have made
Mm.
instead. And then, sure, by all means, point that out, say that, and then say, oh, but here's why I still don't think that would work or whatever. Um, but there are two issues here. One is that uh, it's weird to think that we're all going to agree on which of the alternate arguments that could have been made, whether some other argument they could have made instead would be better or worse than the argument they did make. Presumably, they made the argument they made because they thought that one was pretty good. Um, and it's possible they just didn't think of the better one, but it's also possible they just disagree that it's better because people disagree about how to assess arguments constantly all the time. Um, and which is one of
Yeah, I
the
mean, otherwise philosophy would be easy, right?
yeah, exactly. If we all just like immediately intuited the rank order of like which are the best to worst arguments for each position, then yeah, philosophy would be very, very easy. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
it would basically, I mean, it would be solved as like physics or whatever, right?
yeah. I mean, you'd just be kind of collating the list. Like it's like, okay, well, here's the one we all agree is best for this argument for this position. Is that more or less convincing than the best argument for this position? All right, okay. Like, yeah, it's like it's just not reasonable to expect consensus on how to order which arguments for a given position are better or worse than others. That tends to be a substantive issue and dispute. So when you say, "Oh, I'm going to steel man this," like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to necessarily accept that that's better than mine. And then the other issue is, yeah, if you happen to see a better version of an argument in the vicinity of the argument somebody actually makes, then by all means, after you've explained what's wrong with the argument they made, take the time to be like, well, here's this better thing they could have said. Let's think about whether even that would have been convincing. But why on earth should we assume that there's always a better version that's like just off to the side somewhere that they could have made? Like, honestly, this seems to assume a kind of weird, like, this seems to come uncomfortably close to a weird kind of epistemic relativism that just assumes that there are like great arguments for like everything. That
Right. There's like always a better argument.
yeah, it's like, I don't know, not necessarily. Sometimes maybe there is, sometimes maybe not. Or if there is, it's like extremely not obvious what it would be.
Or you just improve the argument rhetorically instead of substantively, which is pointless.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, what it really incentivizes is, well, you know, because yes, ideally, if you could find a slightly better version of the argument that you can then show, oh, that doesn't work either, then great, right? You've just done something really impressive. But if you're not lucky enough to have some convenient steel lying around, you know, waiting to be formed into a steel man, then it seems like what the expectation of steel manning is going to do is it's going to incentivize this kind of mercenary behavior, the, you know, approach to arguments where it's just like, well, I don't know, maybe there isn't a good version, but I can at least make it sound good. Right? And all of that strikes me as extremely unhelpful. And anyway, I get much more into that. I talk about some of my own experiences with this. So, you know, we can talk about that, or maybe I'll have gotten some, you know, maybe this week I can write something about political violence. We can talk about that. Just have to make sure that Andy isn't tempted to do the kind of graphic that would appeal to his sense of humor for an essay about political violence.
I like that Netanyahu was like, we condemn political violence.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there has been a pretty amazing series of like perpetrators of mass violence speaking out to condemn political violence under any circumstances, but which is definitely worth pointing out. But I will also say that I think that it's you know, look, I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I mean, I am on Twitter, but I do think that there's this temptation to sort of spend all of our time whenever anything comes up pointing out the hypocrisy of other people's takes on it.
Oh yeah, I mean, like hypocrisy is something which personally I find very annoying, but I know
Sure.
it just doesn't matter. It really just doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, I mean, because if nothing, well, I would maybe put it slightly differently. It's like, if it matters, it's just because the hypocrite is being inconsistent, so they can't be entirely right. They must be getting something wrong. But like, that doesn't tell you anything about which part they got wrong. And like, spending all of your time kind of sneering at your enemy's hypocrisy is a good way to get off the hook of having to work out what you actually think.
Yeah,
Like,
if
yeah,
hypocrisy was always a losing move, we wouldn't have to constantly complain about powerful people being hypocrites, right?
yeah. I mean, clearly, well, yeah, that's the other thing. Clearly, it just like, you know, pointing at somebody and saying, "Aha! I accuse you. You're a hypocrite," doesn't actually cause them to burst into flames, or
They don't
or
melt.
melt away into a little pool of shame on the floor. Sadly, nothing else seems to do that either. So
We'll just have to find more powerful rhetoric.
yeah, exactly. That must be the problem. But in any case, yeah, probably talk about one of those things next week.
Bye, everyone.